Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 199. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Saturday, December the 12th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County on a dreary, drab, rainy, almost snowy December morning. I say almost snowy because we're 40 degrees, which means you're not going to get snow at 40, but we're here in December, folks, so we've got those dark, gray, and short days. So, but we make the best of it, right? Lots of stuff in the news this week, and I'm going to talk about absolutely none of it on the podcast, at least none of the big stories. I mean, what are the big stories? The pandemic, the vaccine, the election, the politics. That's all you hear about on the news. And while they certainly are important, I'm not going to discuss them because, quite frankly, what else could be said? I could make some stuff up. I could opine on my opinion on all this stuff, which everybody has a different opinion. Some are good, some are not, but they're all somebody's opinions. And quite frankly, I don't know that that one person's opinion on any of these topics is much different than another. But what we are going to talk about are a couple of things in the news. My essay today, you've heard stories, blue is the new black, 40 is the new 20, etc. As things change in our society, as things change the way we look at things, topics and nomenclatures change as well. Or there's an acronym now going around called UAP. Have you heard of the acronym UAP? UAP is the government speak for Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. They used to call them UFOs, but the government calls them UAPs because UFOs, that's the tinfoil hat crowd. Those are the wackos. Those are the coast-to-coast guys, okay? But UAPs, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon, now that's something that's going on, and the government is actually taking it seriously. Now, are UAPs the same as UFOs? Of course they are. Are UAPs the new UFO? Yes, they are. They're now the trendy one. They're now the one that the government is funding and looking into. And I've got three separate stories I'm going to go into on my essay. And my sources are ABC News, Esquire Magazine, and a newspaper out of the Republic of South Africa called the Mail and Guardian. Okay, so these are three reputable sources, major publications. Mail and Guardian is in South Africa, not so much here, but in that part of the world, it is like the New York Times, okay, or similar publication. So today's essay is going to be about UAPs and three stories that you may have never heard of before. This isn't Roswell. This isn't the Cape Girardeau sighting. This isn't any of that stuff. But these are three new stories, new items, new instances, new facts, new cases that you may have never, ever heard of, ever. One is out of Israel, one is out of the east coast of the U.S., and one is out of Zimbabwe, if you can believe that. But before we go into that essay on UAPs, I wanted to bring up what I think is maybe one of the biggest stories that has broken, I would say maybe in the last 10 years. And I'm talking about economic news, not the pandemic, not the election, stuff that people care about. This is something that really nobody cares about. Few people care about. It's more on the economic front than anything else. But you need to know about it. You need to care about it. But none of the mainstream media sources, none of the traditional media sources are really covering this. And I've covered this myself in ad nauseum to the point where people are just sick of hearing about it. I assume that because I get little to no comments on my Facebook posts, and when I talk to people about it in face-to-face, they look at me like I have two heads and don't know what I'm talking about. But that has to do with what's going on in communist China, mainland China. The latest, and this is out of the Wall Street Journal, which To be fair, I don't get a lot of comments on my Wall Street Journal Facebook posts because, well, I pay for it and they have a firewall. And quite often you can't see what I post because they make you pay for it. So to be fair, the Wall Street Journal is doing a great job of letting people know what's going on in communist China. Now, just recently, Chinese President Xi Jinping, he's a communist, okay? That's not calling him a name. You damn communist. That's not that. He really is a communist. Dyed-in-the-wool communist, okay? He's the head of the Chinese Communist Party, and that's the only political party that's allowed to be in China. That's the only party that's legal, okay? And Xi has killed or jailed each and every one of his opponents within the Chinese Communist Party. So unless he's assassinated or there's a coup d'etat, he will lead China until he dies. Xi is currently 67, which is relatively young when it comes to leaders, okay? Now let's go back in history. After Mao, Chinese leaders began to recognize the pitfalls of communism. The state-run agriculture co-ops were failing so much so that people were starving to death. And starting with Zhou Enlai and starting with Deng Xiaoping, they decided to let the people keep small parcels of land for themselves, farm them, and let them keep whatever they harvest. And a funny thing happened after they did that. People stopped starving, okay? Nobody starved anymore. Now, leaders have built on this idea for decades now, and private enterprise in China has flourished, almost private enterprise within the communist system. And it's eclipsed most state-run ventures, okay? China now has the second biggest economy in the world, just after the United States. And they will eclipse us. And that's not to say anything about the negative about the United States. If you look at the facts that there are about 4 times the people in China that there are here, sure, their economy is going to eclipse ours eventually, perhaps soon. Now, check this out. That may change, and I'll tell you why. Xi wants greater control of the economy. That's how communists work, okay? In fact, the government is installing more Communist Party's officials inside of private firms, demanding that executives tailor their businesses to achieve state goals, not company goals. Or Xi cuts off the credit. Now, in China, if you want to borrow money, you have to borrow it from the government bank. Only the government can provide loans to businesses. That's the way it works. If a company is deemed undisciplined, in other words, non-compliant with what the party wants, the government takes them over. Case in point, Jack Ma, richest man in China, one of the richest men in the world. He's the Alibaba guy. He was forming a company called the Ant Group, and the Ant Group's IPA was stopped personally by Xi because it focused on its own profits rather than the goals of the state. Those are Xi's words, not mine. And businesses, both large and small, are falling into line for now because basically they have no choice. Case in point, there was a company called the Beijing Origin Water Technology Company. Now, this was a sewer treatment company, or a company that provided sewer treatment services to people in China. Now, China was just a mess. Okay, everything. I mentioned one time I was in Guangzhou, and the whole city smelled like a sewer. Okay, now the founder of this company, this Beijing Origin Water Technology Company, is a gentleman named Wen Zhanping, and he was educated in Australia. And he successfully cleaned up much of China's polluted water supply, okay? And he's a billionaire. He's been successful. Wen borrowed money from the state bank, of course, for these new projects, okay? He'd borrow money, build a new project. The new project would be completed. He'd make money, pay it back. Well, he had a bunch of money out for a bunch of loans for a bunch of projects that were not yet complete. And Xi called in the loans before the projects were complete. He said, yep, you need to start paying all the money back starting yesterday. And of course, Wen couldn't pay it back in cash because he didn't have it. That's how business works. So he had to pay Xi back in stock. Now, In other words, he doesn't own his own company anymore. That stock went to Xi, and Xi gave it to China Communications Construction. That's a state-owned company, and they now own most of Wen's company. Wen only owns 10% of his own company now. Beijing Origin Water Technology now focuses on the party's Belt and Road Initiative instead of cleaning up China's sewers. Now, why does Wen do that? That's not what Wen wanted to do, because Wen wants to keep his last 10% of his own company before Xi takes that too. There's many other examples, but you get the picture. Now, Xi thinks he's won, but he couldn't be more wrong. Now, while he will probably control whatever current industry there is in China right now, let me ask a question. How much new private industry do you think will start up under this new Chinese system? How much new foreign investment do you think China's going to get? Private industry in China makes up half of the government's tax revenue, and 80% of urban workers in China work for private companies. 80%. And Xi's going to sit on the private sector like this? Now, here's the dirty little secret about the Chinese people. The Chinese people don't love the party. They don't like the party at all. Trust me, I've talked to many of them. But they tolerate the party because their standard of living has skyrocketed. Now, that's about to stagnate and then decline. Now, Xi's main boy, a guy named Li He, he's Xi's top economic advisor. And he says, and I quote, "State-owned enterprises must become the competitive core of the market." They aren't, but they must, according to he. Now, here's the problem with that. Name a system, name a government, name an entity, name a country that has ever had the state-run agencies that have been the most efficient. It's never happened. It never has happened, and I can't see that it ever will happen. Good luck with that. And that's really good news for us, I think, because and for the West, because Chinese competition, if they go state instead of private, they'll stop being competitive. Their costs will go up. Their efficiencies will go down. And let's be real honest. Why do we buy stuff from China? Because it's cheap. It's not because the quality is better. It's because it's cheap. It costs a whole lot less. And their quality is getting better, by the way, but so is everybody else's. So if you say, you know what, this is made in China, it's not good, but it's cheap, but it's not really what I want, but it's cheap, but it's ugly, but it's cheap, but it's not going to last long, but it's cheap. If costs go up, if efficiencies go down, it's not going to be cheap anymore. And we'll buy stuff that's made someplace else. Maybe here in North America. Well, that's my little news snippet I wanted to touch base on, just to inform you on. But now let's get into the crux of the podcast. Let's get into UAPs, are the new UFOs. Like I said, I have 3 different stories I wanted to talk about because these are eyebrow-raising stories, and they're from traditional news sources as well. The first one, NBCnews.com. That's where I got this story, okay? Not Coast to Coast, not Dark Matters, not Jimmy Church's Fade to Black, none of that. This is from NBCnews.com, and look it up if you don't believe me. This is Dateline from the 8th of this month. A former Israeli security chief has raised eyebrows by saying that Earthlings have been in contact with extraterrestrials from a galactic federation. Now, the unidentified flying objects, and this is according to the gentleman, his name is Chaim Ished, unidentified flying objects have asked us not to publish that they were here. Humanity is not yet ready. Now, who is Chaim Ished? He's the former head of Israel's defense ministry. Okay? And he told Israel's newspaper, it's a Hebrew publication called Hideo Arono, and I may be mispronouncing that. My Hebrew is horrible. But the interview in Hebrew ran back on 12/4, and it gained traction after parts were published in the English version of the Jerusalem Post Tuesday of this week. Now, a respected professor and retired general